So it was fun going into this movie without the slightest idea of what to expect from it. I think this is like a really well-known movie, but for whatever reason, I never really heard much about it. So I sort of went into this thinking that I would have been spoiled on this, but I wasn't. I had no idea what was going to happen, other than like clips from Parks and Rec when Ron's watching the movie. Welcome back to The Rank. I'm John, and today we're going to be ranking The Bridge on the River Kwai. I'm going to be continuing to rank all the Best Picture nominees ever to find out what's the best Picture nominee of all time, what's the best movie of all time, really, right? By those standards. And we're trying to figure out what's the best of each year as well. And the year we're doing right now is 1957. So a few weeks back, I did 12 Angry Men. We're doing The Bridge on the River Kwai this week. Next week is going to be Sayonara. Next week is going to be Peyton Place. So we're going to just sort of keep going on that. Now, for any of you who are new to the show, I'm going to give you a brief agenda here. So we start off with Potent Notables, which are some interesting facts or tidbits about the movie. Then we go into the movie overview, where I talk about the movie. Then we do the namesake of the show, The Rank, where I rank the movie in 10 categories on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best. And actually, the Best Picture one is the only one that I do 1 to 10. Everything else I do 1 to 5. I thought it would give me a chance to have more range, but it just ends up that I have higher scores. Anyway, but if you're enjoying these episodes, or you enjoy the concept of figuring out what the best Picture nominee of all time is, please consider subscribing and or following. Like the episode, comment, ask questions, or send suggestions to the email info@therankpodcast.com. I will respond to you. If you super duper like it, consider becoming a patron on our Patreon site at patreon.com/therankpodcast. So as stated before, today we're going to be doing The Bridge on the River Kwai, which was 1957 Best Picture, not just nominee, but winner, starring William Holden, Alec Guinness, and Jack Hawkins, and adapted from the novel Le Pont de la Rivière Kwai.
Pardon my French.
So that was written by Pierre Boulet, which have you take a wild stab at what his nationality is. And the screenplay was written by Carl Foreman and Michael Wilson, who were originally uncredited for their work, which we'll get into in the Potent Notables. And it was directed by David Lean. It was nominated for 8 Academy Awards and won 7, so it almost won out. You're wild. The only one it was nominated for and didn't win was Best Supporting Actor for Sessue Hayakawa. Now, the ones it won were Best Score, Best Film Editing, Best Cinematography, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Actor for Alec Guinness, Best Director for David Lean, and Best Picture, of course. Now, I stated earlier, the first movie I did for this year, 1957, was 12 Angry Men, and it did really well, getting a 91.5. So this one will have to do really well to beat it and prove the Academy right. So will the Academy get this one right? Let's dive in, starting with the Potent Notables.
Potent Notables.
So as always, we start the Potent Notables with the box office info. Now, Box Office Mojo has the domestic total at $27.2 million, but other sources state otherwise. I found an article from an October 1960 issue of Variety that had the total at $30 million worldwide. It also gave the budget at $2.7 million. So what's really interesting about this article is that they were discussing the fact that the producer, Sam Spiegel, more on him coming up, had concealed the amount of the budget because it only being $2.7 million would detract from the aura of bigness for the production. It was the highest grossing movie of 1957. All right, now at the beginning, I mentioned Carl Foreman and Michael Wilson and how they went uncredited. Well, that was because they were blacklisted. So the writing was officially credited to Pierre Boulet, and it was Pierre who officially won the Oscar as well. Pierre could not read or write English, so that seems fair. Don't worry, the Academy corrected this in 1985 and gave them the awards. Of course, they were already dead. Now, why were they blacklisted? A little thing called the House Un-American Activities Committee, or McCarthyism, if you will. For those of you not boned up on history, this is when a senator, Joseph McCarthy, went on a witch hunt for communists and got a lot of people blacklisted. He destroyed lives. So yeah, he was a neato guy. Between 1947 and 1957, several hundred actors, writers, and directors had been put on a blacklist circulated by Hollywood studios in response to pressure from Congress during the height of the Cold War. Well, Carl Foreman and Michael Wilson were two that were caught up in all of this. Carl admitted to being a member of the Communist Party but dropped out due to disillusionment in 1942. A friend of his named John Weaver said, "The day Carl testified, I drove him to the station. He said they offered a deal. They'd hand him a list of names of people who had been named over and over, and he could pick 5 5 or 6, and that way he couldn't do those people any harm. Carl said he answered, no, but I destroy myself. Thus, blacklisted. That was the end of his quote. Thus, blacklisted was me. The only thing I had on Michael Wilson was that he had written a testimony, which HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee, had refused to allow him to read. It basically said he was opposed to the Korean War and that his political views were his own private opinion. Both he and Carl pled the fifth and refused to testify or name names. Now, Michael had already won an Oscar, but Carl never had. When Carl found out he was dying, he gave a dying wish to his friend mentioned earlier, John Weaver. It was to get him the Oscar that he should have won. So he went to work on helping do just that. He actually found a first draft copy of the screenplay and brought it to him. Carl, quote, clutched it with tears in his eyes. So Weaver got another friend, Levitt, who was also a blacklisted writer, to petition the Writers Guild, and on June 25th, 1984, the Guild heard the petition. They unanimously agreed that the credit for the screenplay belonged to Foreman and Wilson, and after the meeting, Foreman was told they agreed and that he was going to get the Oscar, and he died at 10 a.m. the next day. Unfortunately, Wilson had already passed away 6 years earlier. So kind of a crazy story there. Now, a little more about the script here. Foreman actually optioned the book. When he wrote his adaptation, he added an American character that he was hoping would be played by Humphrey Bogart. Also, Carol Reed was his first choice for director. Obviously, neither of those things worked out, and he started getting into arguments with David Lean. Lean wanted the script to more closely follow the book, and Carl wrote 3 drafts. But eventually, he pawned the rewrites off on Michael Wilson. In a letter to David Lean, he suggested Wilson, as he went on to Columbia to teach. In the letter, he described Wilson as, quote, one of the finest American screenwriters today. In 1957, the Academy had written a new bylaw. No person who admitted he was a communist or refused to answer before any duly constituted federal and legislative committee would be eligible for an Oscar. In the 3 Academy seasons the bylaw was in effect, Dalton Trumbo won under a pseudonym for The Brave One, Ned Young won under a pseudonym for The Defiant Ones, and Michael Wilson had his name kept off both The Bridge on the River Kwai and Friendly Persuasion. So basically, during that time, everybody that won was a supposed commie, you know? It was scary. Now, according to Sam Spiegel, in the light of the blacklist, it was decided to put Pierre Boulez's name on the script. At least he supplied the basic material, and there's quite a difference of view as to who made the bigger contribution, Mike Wilson or Carl Foreman or David Lean. So that's what Spiegel said. Although, when they got their posthumous awards, David Lean said, quote, Mike Wilson, he's the one. Thank goodness he's got the Oscar at last. So I guess we know where David Lean stood on that. Let's just move on to the movie. As far as historical accuracy is concerned, Colonel Saito was inspired by Major Risaburo Saito, who, unlike the character portrayed in this movie, was said by some to be one of the most reasonable and humane of all of the Japanese prison camp commandants, usually willing to negotiate with the POWs in return for their labor. Such was the respect between Saito and Lieutenant Colonel Tusi, upon whom Colonel Nicholson was based, that Tusi spoke up on Saito's behalf at the War Crimes Tribunal after the war, saving him from the gallows. 10 years after Tusi's 1975 death, Saito made a pilgrimage to England to visit his grave. So they clearly made an impression on each other. Now, the 8 months of filming this movie began in October 1956. A scouting expedition of the real River Kwai had shown that it was an unsuitable location for filming, as it appeared to be nothing more than a trickling stream. The production finally settled on a tiny village called Kitulgula in Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka. The site was remote, and a compound of bungalows had to be built for the crew. To erect the bridge, Sam Spiegel, the producer that liked teenage girls, well, he claimed to have spent over $250,000 and 8 months building the bridge. He would tell Fraser Cavassoni that the price was closer to $50,000 and that local labor as well as the river's local elephants had helped the effort tremendously. Sir Laurence Olivier, who would end up doing Lawrence of Arabia with Spiegel and Lean, was offered the part of Colonel Nicholson but turned it down in order to direct The Prince and the Showgirl instead. In retrospect, Olivier said that it was a sensible decision to go off and do love scenes with Marilyn Monroe rather than tough it out in the jungles of Ceylon with David Lean. Yeah, okay, I get where you're coming from, sir. So finally, there are a ton of potent notables for this movie, but I'm going to finish it with this one. Otherwise, I risk making the entire episode about the potent notables.
It already is.
So Spiegel wanted to release the movie by the December 31st, 1957 deadline for the movie to be eligible for the Academy Award consideration for that year, but by early December 1957, the movie did not yet have a music score. So Spiegel hired Malcolm Arnold to compose the score, which Arnold completed in just 10 days. The movie ended up being released in time to be eligible for the 1957 Academy Awards, obviously, and amazingly, Arnold was rewarded with the Academy Award for Best Music Score for his speedy effort. So anyway, those those are all the potent notables. I found them pretty enjoyable. Hopefully you did too. Let's go to the movie overview. So it was fun going into this movie without the slightest idea of what to expect from it. I think this is like a really well-known movie, but for whatever reason, I never really heard much about it. So I sort of went into this thinking that I would have been spoiled on this, but I wasn't. I had no idea what was going to happen, other than like clips from Parks and Rec when Ron's watching the movie. Anyway, what I couldn't help thinking while I was watching this movie was how much Alec Guinness would have hated what I was thinking, because I just kept seeing Obi-Wan. I'm sorry, Alec. I know that's what you didn't like about Star Wars, but I saw that first, and it was impressionable. We get to meet Alec Guinness's Colonel Nicholson and the American Commander Shears right away. It does seem that the movie is showing the stereotypical difference between the stoic Brit and the emotional American. As much as that is stereotypical, I still found it compelling, and the movie had me interested right from the jump. We also meet the evil Japanese commander Saito, who seemed to be another stereotype. I will say though, the movie does humanize him later, though it does definitely have the whole white men know better vibe to it, so that's not great. The head white man, Colonel Nicholson, is going to take a principled stand here. Now, what I expected was something along the lines of, you can't treat my soldiers like this when they're prisoners of war. You're committing war crimes. You need to provide meals and clothing, etc. What was the stand he actually took? Officers don't have to do manual labor, and they will administer the labor of their troops, even going so far as to bring out the Geneva Convention's rulebook and say, see, it says it right here. Okay, fine. So that's the hill he wants to die on. I get not wanting to work, but then all his soldiers are like, yeah, our officers don't work. You better not make them. They cheer on his stand like buffoons. I just don't get it. I mean, Nicholson at one point says that he won't give in to Saito's demands, even though it will mean that his troops will die because officers will not work. It's on principle. And what the hell? Meanwhile, Shears is able to escape the camp and they all assume he's died, but he doesn't die. As a matter of fact, he ends up getting rescued by a British patrol, all to end up on a tropical island where he gets to bang a blonde lady. Then we find out he's not a Navy commander at all. He's actually just a guy who impersonated an officer to get better treatment, which didn't work out anyway, and continued to go with it. Here's what I don't understand about that. Once he got picked up, why even still continue to say he's Shears? Like, at that point, it doesn't matter. Anyway, they use this knowledge against him and basically force him to go back to the camp he escaped from to help them with an operation, with a military operation. The crux of this whole thing is that the Japanese are building a railroad to connect Bangkok with Rangoon, and the final piece is this bridge over the River Kwai. The Japanese, and Saito specifically, are using the POWs to complete the work. Naturally, Japanese engineering is just so inferior to British that once the British take over the project, things start going much better. So these are all the things on the surface. What is below the surface is very compelling. The film is exploring the human psyche, the need to stay busy, to take pride in your work, the frailty of the human mind and how easily it manipulates itself, and overall the madness of war and military order in general. Now, on that count, it's really quite beautiful. Let's see how it ranked.
A rank.
So the rank is where I rank the movie based on 10 categories: story, acting, originality, film coherence, cinematography, score/soundtrack/sound, script structure and dialogue, character relatability, production value, and my rank. I rank it on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best. And before I dive in here, I just want to say, if you're enjoying this episode, please leave a like. It really does help us out. But anyway, the first category is story, and I gave story a 9.5. So the story is the attempt to find your humanity in a terrible situation, and how fine a line it is to walk between the seeking of purpose and madness. That's a pretty great story. Let's go to acting, which I gave an 8.25. There's a lot of old-timey type of acting that is fun for what it is, but I don't consider particularly great acting. To that end, William Holden, was a little hit or miss for me. Ultimately, though, I thought it was really good, and Alec Guinness is particularly impressive in this. So let's go to originality, which I gave a 9.25. War movies are definitely nothing new in 1957. POW movies aren't either. However, I don't think there had been anything quite like this before it. It's a truly impressive undertaking, and it's fascinating how much is bubbling beneath the surface. So let's go to film coherence, which I gave an 8. Now, throughout the movie, I really thought this score was going to end up being lower, but they really pulled it all together in the end. But here's why it's not higher. It's about 30 minutes too long, and Shears feels out of place in it. Finding out that his character wasn't in the book made sense to me. Now, he does provide some good counterweight to the British officer class, and I enjoyed his moments of levity, but they still didn't feel like they fit in really to me. He just felt incongruous at times. I would say that his character was superfluous, but I like that there's a recognition at the end, spoiler alert here, that Nicholson sees to what end an escape is necessary, because earlier in the movie he says he tried to escape, they all died, and so to what end? Soldiers are dead. So to this end, the biggest problem for me is the amount of time we spend just looking at stuff. And I get it, the scenery is stunning, but you've got nearly 3 hours here. Let's trim. It sort of reminded me of Terrence Malick's The Thin Red Line, when he just keeps like looking at birds and shit in the jungle and like, okay, it's pretty, I get it, but like you're not progressing any story here. Now, one last thing, Shears's backstory was just weird. And I mean, it was how they get him to essentially stay in the movie. I don't know, it just felt unnecessary. Anyway, let's go to cinematography, which I gave an 8.25. There are a lot of good perspective shots in this, but it's mostly about as good as you'd think it should be. I think the points where we focus on birds flying and things like that linger too long, which is more the fault of the director in my opinion, but I don't have a category for that, so it's going here. So let's go on to score / soundtrack / sound. I gave it a 7.5. This is another thing that didn't feel special necessarily to me. That doesn't mean it was bad, but it wasn't really a standout for me, and that's kind of where I put 7.5 at. Script structure and dialogue is next, which I gave a 9.75. I thought the script structuring and dialogue were excellent in this. I think the only complaint I'd have would be over Shears and his seemingly incongruous levity. That normally might knock it down farther, but in this case, I feel that the levity was necessary and was the right move, even though it felt off. So I didn't go perfect because of that. So let's go to character relatability, which I gave a 7.5. Everything is definitely really relatable, except for one really big thing. And it just nagged me the whole time. There is just no way that Nicholson's troops would be so behind him after his whole thing is that he refuses to have himself or the other officers do manual labor. That's his big principled thing. And his troops are like, yeah, that's so great. You're a great officer. No, they just keep cheering him on and being proud of his principled stand. I mean, if that were my officer, I would say stop being a lazy bitch. I don't know. All right, so let's go to production value, which I gave a 10. Well, they built an actual freaking bridge. That has to count for something, right? The production value is where this shines. They really utilize their surroundings. You can tell that they put a lot into its authenticity. I believed they were in a POW camp in the jungle. I was never taken out of it by what we were looking at. It doesn't get much better. So let's go to my rank, and I gave it an 8.75. It's obviously an excellent movie. I kept wondering how the movie wanted me to feel about Nicholson the whole time, and by the end I realized that you're meant to feel conflicted, but I never really got there with him. I just didn't like him, and I thought he was a weirdo. Actually, I called him a weirdo 5 times in my notes, and that doesn't necessarily detract too much from how good this movie is, but it was enough to keep me from giving it a 9. So altogether, that puts The Bridge on the River Kwai at an 86.75, just below A Complete Unknown and just above The Revenant, which makes it a supreme cinema. So thanks for listening and or watching, everyone. If you'd like to see a list of my updated Best Picture Series rankings, you can do that on our website at therankpodcast.com. Remember to subscribe, review, and comment. Please consider supporting us on our Patreon site at patreon.com/therrankedpodcast, where you can get access to all of our archived episodes. And once again, if you liked the episode, please leave a like down below. It really does help us out. But for now, I gotta go build a bridge on the river. Goodbye.
Cringeworthy.
100%.
Oh, it's so bad. And then we do the namesake of the show, The Rank, where I rank the movie. Then we do The Rank, where I rank the episode. Nope. I want to say episode because I do fucking TV all the time now.
You say so.